My name is Irene Gunther. I'm a professor of history at the University of Houston and the Honors College, and I'm proud to present my Spring 2020 10 o'clock class, Students Projects. We focused on the Great Migration of more than 6 million African Americans out of the South to other regions of the United States in the North and in the West. They fled oppression and brutality in the South and hoped to find better opportunities and more fulfilled lives in other parts of the United States. That movement, that great migration, transformed American culture, society, and politics in countless ways. And so as we read and we researched, students then focused on particular issues that they transformed into creative projects. Those projects range from photography and film to literature, art, short story, digital projects, and music projects to educate themselves and the public about this transformative yet largely unrecognized movement, the consequences of which we still feel today. We hope, both my students and I, that you will share these videos with friends and perhaps also with people you're not so familiar with who might be interested in learning more about the Great Migration and about the ways in which that Great Migration transformed our American nation, both when it occurred and still today. In this moment of national reckoning on racism, we hope that you will find that these projects resonate not only with this moment, but also will resonate more generally with your understanding of American history. Enjoy.
Good evening, Miss Irene. My name is Daniel Lagbudoa. I'm in your 10 a.m. history class, and this is my creative project. I wrote a poem based on the events that happened during the Great Migration. My poem tells the story of a young man and his plight during the South and why he chose to run away to the North and how he fared over there. It's titled The Man with Ebony Skin. I really hope you like it, and yeah, this is it. The Man with Ebony Skin. Peaceful nights, no fights or plights. Most blacks in the South yearn for. Through thick and thin, they endured it all, the segregation standing tall. The year was 1917, when the man with ebony skin left his home in Tennessee for a land he had never seen. He had had it up to here, with the oppression everywhere, with a little chance to make a living, an unfailable practice made by someone scheming. Suppressive norms the white men had towards him and his brethren dear, all because you wouldn't give up your seats, the white men's beating you bear. Goodbye, Jim Crow, he said with relief as he got on a train with his wife and kids, carrying nothing with him but a steadfast faith that the North won't bring nothing like hate. When he arrived with pleasure and glee, for the first time ever, he was actually at ease. The oppression still stood tall, but his case was quite better than before. With a life with more opportunity at least, he worked in a factory, finally able to make a living. This newfound place still tough, gang mobs at an all-time high, but this did not falter our dear old man, for his life he had come to beautify. He sat on his porch with the evening summer breeze and smiled to himself, thinking life was much better here, being a man with ebony skin. I hope you liked it, and I hope you're staying safe. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.
The basis for my project centers around a quote from our text, The Warmth of Other Suns, that I found particularly inspiring. The line, "One color of wildflower was no better than another," struck a deep chord with me the moment I read it. I wanted to create a literal example of how beauty can exist with any combination of color, and decided to use cutouts of people of all skin tones from magazines. I was drawn to sculpture and chose the simple, dural material of paper and pipe cleaners because I believe physicality is one of the most effective ways to impart a message. My inspiration for a single paper flower stems from small flowers that organizations, like churches and the VA, pass out on holidays such as Mother's Day and Veterans Day. I don't know how familiar others are with them, but I think the sentiment of a small, handcrafted gift that wouldn't perish is thoughtful. This sculpture is supposed to be like a gift for everyone. If we had a chance to display our works in a gallery, I would have encouraged people to touch the flower and feel the physical unity displayed.
Hi, my name is Serena Bryant, and I'm discussing my creative work based on the topic of colorism. I use two components to express the issue of colorism and to represent the issues that have derived from it. I created a collage of pictures on a fence to represent the boundary of colorism. These pictures include many African American celebrities that have different skin complexions, and this fence also is ordered from light to dark skin due to the unseen hierarchy of blacks based on skin tone. My second creation was a painting that I created that explains the genetic makeup of three men and how two were less successful due to their dark skin tone and their Afrocentric features, while their light-skinned brother had more success in his occupation due to lighter skin and more Eurocentric features. I put these pictures together and painted on my canvas and really was trying to get the visual aspect of seeing the color and how it is different and how different features affect African Americans in our community. My project was inspired by my personal struggle with colorism on the Black community. I myself am light complected and have had to be excluded from those who were darker, less successful, and also personally hateful towards me due to my lighter skin. There is a lot of segregation within the African American race, and this class has taught me a lot about discrimination, more than I know, and how it has also affected many other races besides African Americans. And I have also seen many race issues, but I noticed that um, if there's a pattern of unity, it does seem to help when people stick together and are strong rather than of being against each other and being against each other within their own race.
Hello there. I'm here to talk about a little bit about my poem that I wrote for the creative project. And so the poem that I wrote, I called it "Dreams Lost Amid the Mist." And this is a story that kind of has two parts. Part one is about Edward, who witnesses a lynching, and then there's part two, which is about Ressie, who wants to be a writer, and she basically symbolizes the struggle of Black women who had to go through sexual assault, and how they were just silenced and never could never had the voice that they needed to really get the issue out there. And so this was overall the topic of racial terror during this era. And I thought that it was really interesting because this terror is something that people have to, like having to live in terror is something that's very unsettling. And I wanted to explore more about how it would have been to have to live thinking that you might get lynched or that you might get raped one day. And that's what my poem was meant to express, just how it is to have to live in those conditions. And that's what Edward and Ressie in my poems try to symbolize. Hello there. I'm Aaron, and this is my poem, Dreams Lost Amid the Mist. Part 1. Edward wanted to be a musician. On stage, large crowds, excitement. It was the dream he had always wanted. His town had a local show the other day, featuring Jesse, his friend. Jesse was atop the tree, on stage. Around him, a large crowd, excitement. The energy set the stage ablaze. Screams and applause, cheers of delight, until Jesse's presence seemed to fade away. You could only perform once in this town, so Edward decided he could no longer stay, because as long as he was here in the South, his musical dream would never take place. Part 2. Ressie wanted to be a writer. Even though she was only 8, she always felt she had a story to tell. One day, she came up with a great idea and spent the entire night writing it. When she finished the next day, Ressie asked for people to read over it, except no one would. "I'm busy," they said. "Not now," they said. All they would do is make excuses. But it was clear for Ressi that what the issue was. Nobody cared to hear a story from an 8-year-old's head. All stories are meaningful, and all should be heard. Ressi understood this, but no one else would. An eternity later, part of her story was discovered, but the rest remains lost, waiting to be recovered.
My project is a drawing of a tipping scale. It is drawn to show how eugenics-based beliefs and policies have rigged society. It represents Nordics considered fit as cookie-cutter people lifted up by eugenics, and shows how racially and ethnically different and unfit persons are repressed and confined by eugenics.
My project took inspiration from the song and poem Strange Fruit, as well as the lynching postcards that were popular during this time period. The artwork is based off Strange Fruit in that it takes a lot of inspiration from the actual story that the poem was based off of, in which the tree had died after the lynching, as well as the entire symbolism of the artwork. In addition, it was based on a postcard which was popular during this time period to spread fear among American Black communities. So on my artwork, you can see that it is clearly shaped in a similar way as a postcard and would most likely be sent off to scare Black people away from living in a certain area, or just keep them quiet about the injustices going on against them. And that is where my artwork comes from. You can notice on the back that it has an area for the stamp and the address, further showing that it's meant to be a postcard. Thank you. And if this audio recording is worse quality, it is because I had to record off of my phone because I don't have my microphone anymore. Thank you.
My name is Clarissa Garcia, and my piece is titled Living Under Two Suns. In my art piece, there is a notable difference between the book materials that white students and Black students received. On the top half of the picture, there are bookshelves filled with new books, and there are numerous titles that students can choose from. And then on the bottom half of the picture, there are just 2 pages that are torn apart, and these are the materials that Black students would be using. At the center of the photograph, there is a woman whose hair is meant to symbolize the sun, in reference to the book that we read together as a class, The Warmth of Other Suns. With this imagery, my hopes were to provoke the thought that Black and white students during this time and even today feel like they're living under 2 separate suns, where the education that they receive is not equal at all.
My painting, Remember Where We Have Been, was inspired by just how awful it must have been to be an African American in that time, to experience that violence day in and day out and just be terrified. For the style of my painting, I learned how to do this in 6th grade for a math project, and I used a grid paper, and I kind of drew out what I wanted on there, and then I traced it with the gold wiring later, and then I would flip it over and then paint on the inside of the thing so that the outside is glossy. It kind of gives off like a mosaic kind of view, and like I like that it's like a stained glass painting. It's very representative of like how people justified their awfulness with the word of God, and like a lot of people believed that they were not doing anything wrong.
This poetry piece highlights the issue of African American lynchings in the warmth of other suns through the perspective of the real-life story of African American Spanish-American war veteran Private James Neely and his lynching. I felt a poem was most appropriate for this project because many people try to hide this dark portion of racial discrimination. In the past, a lot of lynching records, along with the people who were lynched, were erased from history in many ways. The characters' perspectives and stories in the warmth of other suns inspired me to write this poem in the perspective of James Neely. If we can retell a story accurately ourselves, it's a way to remember the past and remember those who have been killed for simply wanting equality. Retelling the stories of those who fought for equality provides a more personal connection between the reader and the real-life person and what they stood for, just like hearing the stories of the 3 real characters in the book. I believe that words can speak volumes to an array of audiences. The best type of way is through my eyes to address difficult issues of history, especially lynchings, is not only through pieces of artwork, such as paintings and sculptures, but also through works of literature that have layers of deeper meaning. A cold, white beverage. Dear Private James Neely, I died today. How unfortunate that it might be that the last color I see is supposed to be that of an angelic one. By the white, I lost my life. I'd always thought that perhaps we may be seen as one, but I could still be myself. A service for my country was meant for all of my people, and yet they did not see me as one of them. In service, I drank fear and ate death, and yet when I ask for a drugstore beverage, I am told to have mud. As in war, I was surrounded by lost and angry white souls. Upon the oncoming crowd, I fiercely stand, and to a black man's expectation, the whites who I fought for would not fight for me. I ran for my life, in which this action was in vain. I heard a shot. I felt a shudder, stillness, and then a piercing pain. Though it was one bullet, the pain was more intense than that of any war inflicted upon my being. I understood, and yet I couldn't, about what I had done wrong. I saw the white once more, but this time it was angelic, comforting, and I felt still. Dear me, I died today.
Our project is called Overlooked. It is a series of 3 paintings done with acrylic paint on canvas. We demonstrate 3 scenes of African American people during the decades of the Great Migration. On the left is a man picking oranges in a Florida grove. In the early to mid-1900s, orange picking was romanticized and the hard work done by African American pickers was unappreciated. The middle is a spin on Rosie the Riveter, representing an African American woman in an industrial job in World War II. She would have likely been the last person picked and the first person fired. The right is an African American veteran who returned home from war only to be met with violence and disregard for his service. We decided to paint the 3 people gray and faceless to demonstrate how African Americans were often not seen and valued as human beings, even though they contributed significantly to American society.
The inspiration for our project comes from Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, and it relates to what we learned in class along the same lines as how we learned that against the background of white America, African American workers and war veterans and grove pickers really kept the economy in the country moving forward, even if they aren't recognized and treated equally as their white counterparts in the nation. And we believe it's extremely important to bring light to these incredibly brave people who took this opportunity during the Great Migration to make a better lives for themselves up north and out west.
Hi, my name's Natalie Nava. I wrote a poem called A Southerner in Northern Life. So I wrote this from the perspective of a southern migrant that has just arrived in the north and begins to live life in the north. And I wanted the poem to revolve around 3 main themes, which was disdain from northern blacks towards southern migrants, and also food culture and how different it was between the north and the south, as well as living conditions that was thrilling to the southerners, but yet they were clustered away from the rest of society. And so I drew this inspiration from the poems that would appear before every story in our book, The Warmth of Other Suns, and how the poems served as a little mini introduction before each story began. And I really kind of wanted to reflect that same idea. And basically what we've been learning in class is how the Great Migration isn't talked about enough. And definitely Southern migrants underwent great adversity, and they went to the North, escaping Jim Crow South, expecting to find very positive conditions and positive reactions from their fellow men, but instead they realized the complete opposite.
Hello, my name is Amy Nguyen. For the creative project, I've chosen to focus on racial violence in the North and the invisible color line created by de facto segregation. Lynchings did not occur only in the South. In the book The Warmth of Other Suns, Wilkerson retells the story of how Eugene Williams was killed by a group of white boys for swimming past the color line at Lake Michigan. The story inspired me to create a painting that reflects the reality of the invisible segregation in the North. While the North claimed to be democratic and equal, racism still exists in subtle forms that can have fatal consequences. Violence was used to reaffirm the self-assumed supremacy of whites. In the painting, I separated the water with a trail of blood, which represents the invisible line that made visible with the violence that Eugene Williams experienced. While black and whites exist in the same space, they live in two completely different worlds. The murder of Eugene Williams also brought up the issue of a flawed justice system that favored whites. The lack of fair trials for blacks and the refusal to prosecute white criminals for racially motivated crimes further exacerbates blacks' terror and trauma.
Hi, I'm Olivia, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my work, The Maze of Life. A major part of the story is the railroads and traveling and strength it takes in order to pick up everything and move to a new life. I was constantly amazed by the strength of George, Ida, and Robert as they fought for their dreams, even though they constantly came up against different difficulties throughout the whole novel. The white blank spaces represent each of the protagonists, and all the lines around them are the different hardships and difficulties that they have to face in order to start their new lives. Since I'm not a natural artist, this took me a really long time, and the line art was actually much more difficult than I thought it would have been, but it was actually really relaxing to work on. This work can also apply to our class, because in history class in high school, I was always taught such a watered down version of events, and I never really understood all of them as well as I thought I did. But in this class, we got to go deeper into these events and find more nuance. And I really enjoyed this class, and I really enjoyed the project, and I hope you enjoy my project.
Hello, my project is about the lynchings that occurred during the Great Migration era to the thousands of black people in the community. My project was inspired by the fact that it really didn't discuss about the brutality and violence that these murders occurred across all the southern states in various quantities, and I was kind of just shocked and awed by the brutality of it at first, and then of course just we don't really learn about it anymore. Like, even though it happened not even 100 years ago, it's still very recent history to our country, but it's almost just hidden away by the community and shunned the idea that this did happen in America. And I wanted to do my project on this due to the fact because I want it to be more well known. I want America and us as citizens to be ashamed of what occurred, but not forget it, that this is part of our history and part of our past, because those who fail to remember history are doomed to repeat it again. And this is why I wanted to do this project about this, to bring light to the tragedies that occurred in the past. The hissing snake. Making sure to walk on the right side, only way to stay alive, and not the snake will come beside, by sliding closer and closer when all I want to do is survive. Hiss, hiss. It gets harder to live this life and I will die, not knowing when the snake will take my life. looking up, wishing I was truly free like the birds in the sky, always terrified of the snake's fangs that sharp as a knife. Hiss, hiss. Today was the day I stepped a toe out of line. It was all that was needed for a snake to come behind. It wrapped its way around my throat, feeling like twine, pulling me up in order to remind. Hiss, hiss. As I hung, my learns burned like fire. I was shown off like a prize. My death was all they desired. As the snake tightened, all I felt was my demise. Hiss, hiss. More came, I could barely hear their feet as they stampeded to watch as I was taller than a tree. No more air in my lungs, they succeeded. They thought my life was theirs, the referee. Hiss, hiss. I felt limp as the world turned dark. It was done, so no other toes came out. I was not the last one whose life ended too quick, just an arc. Sure, more dead men would come about. Hiss, hiss. Only benefit is I would not see more brothers dead, as more snakes wrapping around throats was where I spread.
Okay, so my painting title is A Man of the Great and is inspired by Jacob Lawrence's The Migration series. It is illustrating a migrant man during the Great Migration. In my project, I attempted to follow Jacob Lawrence's style of painting and added my own style to give it more detail and symbolism. Also, I combined some of the symbols I noticed in Jacob Lawrence's paintings or panels into my own painting. The details and symbols I have added highlight the issues I am addressing, including segregation, lynching, and sharecropping, all of which I have learned in class and I have read about in The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. I guess I decided to do a painting not only because I really love Lawrence's art, but also because I had paints on hand. This painting and project also gave me and my younger sister something to do while we were stuck at home quarantining. She was constantly bored and asking me what she could do, so I finally snapped and said we're going to work on this project. Plus, she's a way better painter than me, so my project and I really benefited from her involvement. As we worked on this project together, I found it to be a great learning and teaching experience. As we painted and drew, my younger sister had a lot of questions to what the symbols meant and about the issues we were addressing. Before explaining anything to her, I wanted to make sure that what I was explaining to her was right, so I fact-checked everything with the sources provided on the website. Doing this, I gained a lot of knowledge, some of which I remembered learning in class. Also, I believe this was a great learning experience for my younger sister, who had little to no knowledge on the issues we were addressing, and I hope, with it being a hands-on experience, she will be able to remember it for years to come.
I wrote my research paper over the Southerners' use of violence against African Americans. My thesis was the most effective way for Southerners to maintain their power over African Americans was through lynchings and racial terror. And then I just wrote about a bunch of examples of like lynchings and stuff, how they use that to maintain control over African Americans and keep them at the bottom of the social caste system. And I also wrote about like sharecropping and how that related to like it wasn't slavery, but it was basically like slavery, just like because slavery was abolished, like they couldn't do that. And then I also wrote about other ethnic groups that were also lynched. So it wasn't like African Americans were the majority of the groups that were being lynched, but like there were also other ethnic groups that were being lynched. And I wrote about how it wasn't a way of punishing African Americans or like keeping social justice or like punishing them for doing something wrong. It was about keeping them at the bottom of the caste system. And that was basically it.
Okay, for my project, I just wanted to make something that showed the dichotomy between life for whites and life for blacks after World War I. So there's a diagonal line that splits the page, not quite in half, but it splits it into two parts, and the top part illustrates the quality of life many whites enjoyed as opposed to the discrimination many blacks still had to endure under the Jim Crow South, and that's all it was really trying to do.
This drawing depicts two American dreams. The bottom half of this piece depicts the white American dream, while the top half represents the African American dream. The white dream includes illustrations of a lynching rope, eugenics building, and money floating around. This alludes to the white American's obsession with power. On the eugenics building, I implemented a sign that reads, "Enter the fitter family conscious today," to illuminate the absurdity of the eugenics movement.
The black dream includes an illustration of restrooms labeled for all men and for all women, a sidewalk, and books. During the Great Migration era, black Americans were shoved to the bottom of society and didn't receive any respect. They were stuck with unsanitary fountains, restrooms, and waiting rooms. In addition, black Americans were not allowed to walk the same path as a white man. If they saw a white man on their path, they had to step off the sidewalk. The books on the right side were implemented to remind others not to take their education for granted. During the Great Migration era, minorities weren't given the opportunity to expand their knowledge because another race wanted to maintain their claimed racial superiority. Hovering over the two dreams, I drew a businessman's hand drawing the barrier between the two races. I wanted to emphasize the control that businesses had during the Great Migration era. Business leaders were often made up of white Americans, which allowed them to manipulate and maintain their superiority over all minorities. The two American dreams highlight the differing values and priorities between the two races. Black Americans were granted nothing from society. The things they wish for are things we don't have to worry about losing today because we have a better understanding of basic human rights.
The name of my work is Blurry Reminder. In the Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, tens of millions of African Americans use trains to escape the racist and segregated South. Today, millions of African Americans rely on public transportation to get to work, the store, and countless other places. Even in today's bleak pandemic, the metro is constantly running and always full of scared, hopeful, and resilient minority peoples trying to continue with their life. The rushing, blurred train serves as a reminder of the non-stop forces set against minorities in America.
My project is titled Colors Amid Oppression, and it features a train much like one that would have been transporting the migrants from the south to the north or the west. And you can see that it is going out from an area where the skies seem very foreboding and gray and is going towards a sunrise, representing the promises that they have heard about and their hopes for the future. You can also see the right side of the painting features some flowers that are green and purple. Those colors are representing wealth and luxury that they have heard of and that they also hope for. However, at the bottom right of the painting, you can see some gray kind of seeping into these flowers, showing that oppression still exists, although it is not obvious to them at the time, and it's something that they do not quite see. Also, from the train, from the windows, the doors where the migrants are, you can see a bunch of colors coming out, and these represent, the red represents their passions, their desires, and also the culture that they will be transporting to the north with them. There's also blue that represents their hope, trust, and faith in what they are doing. The orange represents their desires and their enthusiasm for what they're going to do. They're very hardworking, they're very determined to make a new life for themselves and their families. And then finally, you can see the whole train is kind of immersed in this yellow glow, and this really represents the hope that there won't be as much oppression as there was in the South.
The in-depth research paper by Andrew Wilson focuses on the history of income inequality between white and black Americans. He argues that it is a deeply rooted issue that still plagues black communities today. While the issue began initially with slavery, of course, it's really in the years after the Civil War when so many black Americans in the South were forced to become sharecroppers, and even those African Americans who lived in the North and in the West were paid far less than their white counterparts. That discrepancy continued throughout the 20th century and continues still today in 2020. Today, African Americans, even after receiving a large amount of education and better incomes, still have fewer opportunities and less social and economic mobility when compared to their white counterparts. He makes this argument with studies and a large amount of statistics and data to illustrate the realities of those issues that still haunt African American communities and still set back the United States in so many ways.